What's up, guys? Welcome to today's video. Really excited about this one. I was even more excited when I was able to pull this together and make it happen. Today we're going to do a comparison of the three big name headers that were made for the V6 in these cars. So Pacesetter, S&S, and TOGs, or the other guys. So I have one of each set here, and what we're going to do is I'm going to use this car since it's sitting here waiting on parts. I'm going to show you the stock manifold setup all the way down to the downpipe, and then what I'm going to do is kind of briefly show you how those come off, and then we're going to line up all four basically to show you the difference, and then one by one I'm going to at least halfway install each one to show you how it goes on, what they look like, and the downpipe situations that you'll have to worry about if you happen to get any of these. So one more thing, so this isn't actually like a how-to with these. You know, I'll do a time lapse of each one. You know, I'll have to do this over about a week because each install is going to be about, 2 hours or so. And, I probably won't tighten them down all the way, but I'll get it to where you can actually see. We'll take a good look over. We'll get under the car, see how the downpipe falls. So definitely stay tuned at the all the way through to the end of this. I got a couple shout outs to make that even made this possible. It really shows the community coming together, especially with someone that I've been working with a long time. So to keep things equal and really give you a comparison, a good visual, I guess, is to start with stock. So here's what your stock manifolds are in your car now. So front log, crossover, your rear log, which then goes to your downpipe, which I have a stock one here and I have a Millsy one. I'm actually, when I'm done and put this car how I'm going to with these, I'm going to try and install that Millsy to see what the deal is with why his is short. We'll definitely look into that. Back to our stock ones here. You can see how tiny these are as far as your diameter. And then as far as downpipe, this one's a 2-inch. That's what I was able to get for an OEM replacement. GTs are stock with 2 1/4, and SCs typically have 2-inch. So that's stock. We'll just move right down the line. All right, so our first aftermarket headers, whatever you want to call it, Pacesetter. So Pacesetter seemed to be the longest running one. I remember them still being in production when I first started this about 10 years ago. Theirs is a little different. I find it kind of odd, but I see how it works. I mean, we'll definitely see on the car. So it's kind of a 4-piece situation. And well, I'll just show you here. So here's your front header. As you see, that kind of wraps around there. Here's the back header. There's their version of, I guess, what you would call a crossover, and it meets down by the subframe with these band clamps, then to your downpipe, which here's the one that kind of came with it. They kind of threw together with a flex and with a high flow MagnaFlow cat. So pretty interesting, and as you can see, it's actually held up pretty good over the year with the stainless. So they even put their, kind of worn off, but it does say Pacesetter right there. So this does have provisions for an EGR, the 2000 plus actually, because 99 had different. So you're able to run this if you have to run EGR for emissions reasons. You can 100% run these headers here. And then as far as the O2, that you stick your O2 all the way down here at the bottom. Remember that for the next ones because each one's a little different. The gaskets are cut up stock ones. So stock ones have these kind of ridges that kind of jut in and out, kind of like a shielding. And as you see, these are using these flat flanges, just like this. Have to bolt each one on. So not a big deal, just kind of a little side note there. So that's Pacesetter. Let's move on to the next one. All right, so next is S&S. Now S&S, I actually had a set of them. They were great. I loved them. You could definitely tell the difference. And what else is cool about S&S is on eBay right now there's a company called OBX. Now it's a very hit or miss company across the board because they make headers for all kinds of cars. They actually use this design. Last I checked before filming this, I think they were floating around the 600 mark. I've seen them as low as 350. There was a point when they jumped all the way up to 700, and it kind of bounces around. Buy them and they're good. You're actually getting S&S headers. S&S is a two-piece. So here's your front that wraps around the motor, and just before the back head is a connection. And then here's your back header. That goes down just about where your subframe is. And then here we have a downpipe that was made for it with a high flow cat also. So remember on the last one, I mentioned O2 placement. So right here you'll find this also has the provision for an EGR 2000 plus. And on this one, they actually put the O2 here on basically the front collector. So kind of questionable because it's not reading the back bank. If you're having an issue with the back head, you're not going to catch it as far as, fueling wise. So it could end badly, but like I said, really didn't notice anything in my case. For this connection, so they came with what was called a donut flange. So basically with the donut flange, so you get this rubber thing. It's like metal with rubber around it, right? It's a donut. It sits between two flanges that cup each side. You bolt that together and it creates pressure. Now it can be a real pain. I remember when installing the S&S, it was a learning curve because I never dealt with that. But once I figured out, the trick to doing it right, you almost have to loosely put front and back on. You tighten down the donut and then you tighten down the actual headers. It all kind of came together. But on these, they went ahead and changed it to a V-band. So that's 100% better. V-band is, go-to for just about any exhaust setup. It's two mating surfaces. You butt them together, you put the clamp on, you're done. No searching for a gasket because these can be a pain to find also. Well, that's pretty much everything for S&S. So our third and final header setup is TOG or the other guys. So theirs is a three-piece setup. You got your front here, meets about where the thermostat is. It's got this little extra crossover piece, and then the rear, and that stops just short of the subframe. This is actually one that only has a 2-bolt flange. The rest have 3. These are the donut flanges I was talking about. So both ends have this like bevel to them. You stick the donut in there and you bolt it together. As you can see, I left this one together. But so you have 2 of those joints on these. Still have your EGR provision, your 2000 plus. And they stick the EGR down here just before the downpipe. So that wraps it up for at least an overlook of our NA aftermarket headers. So we'll jump to installing each one, kind of maybe talk a little bit as I'm doing it. So I do have one more surprise for you guys. Not really a surprise, you guys already knew I had them, but I figured since I'm talking about that subject, let's throw them in. So here's Millsy turbo headers. So these are an older style, around 07, 08 area. So they're his like second or third set he'd ever made. So they are kind of rough welded together, but they're solid and they work. These are also pre-V-band days, so they look like just collector flanges. Turbo obviously goes here. Got a 2.5 downpipe, and then they made a 2.5 with a MagnaFlow high flow cat there. You'll see that when we do Tanner's car, so definitely hang on and look forward to that probably in a few months here. So one little thing I did kind of notice, I didn't realize I noticed, but I just noticed. So I also have Millsy manifolds on my car. So I want you to take a look and see how each one is just kind of individually chilling there. You can use stock manifold gaskets for this. Mine, which were made probably 3-4 years ago. Mine, if you can kind of see, it's really dark. It's got that flat plate flange, okay, and then everything's welded to it. So basically it's one of these and the primary is welded to it. But yeah, that's enough to talk about that. Let's get to work. So I have stock mocked up as a starting point. Now, these are bare. The front has a shield, the crossover has a shield, and then the back one has like a two-piece shield, top and bottom. Those are all supposed to be 10 millimeter, but with rust and corrosion, you get, crappy bolts that corrode. And then I got a stock downpipe at least on at this point, because I just finished the exhaust on this thing. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do that downpipe there. We'll just take the downpipe out, set it aside. Again, basically get your stock exhaust off and downpipe, because if you're doing any of these headers, nothing's gonna use the stock point. So the downpipe is two 15 millimeters up on the engine side. There's two of them, and it's honestly much easier to get from underneath. You need a lot of extensions, use lots of heat and lots of WD-40. Let it soak a day or so, because they're a pain. The downpipe, if your bolts are still intact, should also be 15s. I've only had one clean one that actually came apart. The rest were so corroded that the head of the nut were gone. Like, there was just nothing left. You just have to cut it off and start with a new flange. So good luck with that. The manifolds themselves, so all those 10 millimeters on the heat shields, you get the heat shields off. Then what you're gonna want to do, everything's a 13. So on each end are 3 nuts for this crossover. That'll pull out. There's 6 13 millimeter nuts on each front and back manifold. Now you may get some nuts and you may get some that look like bolts. Really doesn't matter as long as you don't break it. If you break it, you're in for another ride. Basically, that's what could come out. It'll take the whole stud with it. Heat, WD-40. Again, just take your time, because if you try to rush it, try to break them loose real, dry, you're asking for trouble. As far as what else you got to take out, just real quick, I'll give you an idea. You're going to want to drain your cooling system. Crossover pipe needs to come out. Your upper radiator, your upper hose needs to come off. Your best bet to take your air box and your upper manifold off. So that means cold packs, undo your EGR, all your vacuum lines and stuff. And as far as the belt side, if you get your alternator, just the alternator itself out, that gives you a bunch of room to work with. If you're doing this, just, again, take your time. If something's in your way, just take it out instead of trying to fight with it. Honestly, with any of these, you're tight for space. You get this stuff out and we'll get started. So first, since this will be the easiest for me to mess with, the TOGs. So the TOGs, like I said, was a 3-piece situation. So your back, this little mid thing, and your front. I've got this kind of pre-assembled and I left it that way because that alone will save some headache. If this isn't together, my suggestion is getting the back one on, get the front one on, get this guy in place, get your donut gaskets all set up, make sure they're seated pretty good, tighten that all down, and then go back through and tighten the actual headers down. This one actually has a 2-bolt flange, so a little different from the rest. There's a row 2 sensor, still effective. You'll just have to have a downpipe made for these. $150, $200 at your local exhaust shop usually, because you'll probably want 2.5. And as you can tell, they're going to probably have to make some kind of curve. You're going to want to flex in there, and then whatever to get to where your catback starts. Ran into one thing that I totally forgot. I went through the same thing on my car with both my headers. The oil dipstick's in the way. So, like I said, same thing. I ran into on my car. That's just a little 13 millimeter here. There. So yeah, so dipstick's got to come out. We'll set that aside for a second. If you didn't catch it earlier, I really didn't have one in hand to show you guys, but so here's a stock manifold gasket, right? Remember I talked about the ridges? So that won't work with this flat flange. So what you're gonna have to do is, I just took 10 snips, just cut each one out where it's flat, and then these ones that have a lip, just snip that lip off, just make it all flat, like those other pieces were, and you'll be good to go. Here's TOG's semi-installed. I got them down in at least where they're not going to go anywhere. I didn't put this donut flange in. I kind of wanted to show the area and kind of what went on with this. Dipstick had to be moved, but you can put it back in if I can find the hole. And then it can be bolted back down where it's supposed to be. Not really anything up front to be worried about. I do have the fans out. They're not bad to take out if you want to go that route. It makes this 100% easier to get this in place and get to the bolts. This one I do remember, for whatever reason, the angle of it, I did have to drop the AC compressor on that car to get to these two bolts on the bottom side. I do notice how close these hoses are. I'm not really a fan of that. Especially, it basically comes down to what this crossover connects. And then the EGR tube also kind of interferes with this other hose. You know, that would have to be bent around to figure out how to make that work with that. Header wrap can fix that. As far as the back, not too bad. Again, you know, taking that alternator out gives you all that access. As you saw, I kind of fought with it a little bit to get it in, but once it found the groove, it fell right in, and you just put it against your head and tighten it down. Coming around here, so as far as this guy, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to do one bolt, and then you're going to want to spin it, and then get your other two bolts, so one here and the one underneath. You'll be able to get to those two just fine, but that one with a tighten you won't be able to get to it. So I had to undo these two and then spin it to get to that third one. But that's basically how they look. Obviously it didn't take me long because I already have half the stuff apart, but I mean, for what it is, it's really not a bad install. Let me come under here. There's the flange for the downpipe. And you can see how it falls just before the subframe ends. It's a little close to the rack. I mean, there's space in there. The downpipe area, when they make that, you'll be fine. And then you'll just need from there to your cat back. So this is where all the cat backs will fall. So you'll just need that little bit of pipe made. You'll be ready to roll. So that's TOG's. Alright, so we're actually gonna end it right there with this part, because there's so much more I still want to go over, and we've only talked about one set of headers. So I'm gonna get those off and get that ready for the next set, and that's what we'll pick up the next video. So I'm really excited to get this info out for you guys, get these visuals out, because it's really cool having all these here and being able to see them installed. Hopefully you guys are liking what's going on so far. Stay tuned, and I will see you on part 2.